Hi all, welcome to Cyber Warfare Lab's AWS Cloud Red Team course. In this module, we will discuss about how we can enumerate different informations about RDS. So let's get started. So you can see here, I already configured my CLI, and one thing you should keep in mind that you need at least list as well as get rights there in RDS to enumerate informations. So if you have a get as well as list rights there in RDS, you can enumerate the information which is there or which is related to RDS. Okay, so let's start. So first, what we are going to enumerate, we are going to enumerate about cluster. So this is the first information you should know about RDS. So cluster, this is a command which we use to getting the informations about RDS. So that will give you information about clusters if there are any cluster there in RDS. So let's copy this command and paste it here. So there is no cluster. So when it's available, suppose if you are using AWS Aura as a database engine, it will by default create a cluster for you. So basically cluster means you have within a cluster you have a lot of instances, but there may be a chance that you have a instance individuals. So let's how we can enumerate the instance if we have instance individual, or if you are using any other database engine, just like if you are using MySQL, MS SQL, Postgres, or any other relational database. So now we are going to enumerate information about how many instances are there in RDS. Instances means it's not part of a cluster, but it's a standalone instances which may be used for any other just like MySQL engine, MS SQL engine, or any Postgres or any other database. So I just copied this command from here and I will paste it here. Open a new tab and I will paste it here. So it will give you the information about instances which is available there in particular AWS account, irrespective of region. So it will give all the instances which is there in each and every regions. You can specify the region, but it will, if you are not specified any region, it will give all the instances which is there in all the regions. So you can see here how we can get the information or how we can read the information which is there about a particular instance. So this is the first instance we have. So this is the instance identifier. So you can see here the instance name, which is unique name for each and every instance. For this particular instance, the name is Red Team Public RDS. This is the type of instance. Basically, it's run on the EC2 instance itself, but you cannot manage. So all these things will be managed by AWS. And the engine is MySQL. This is really important because RDS, we can say relational database services provide different engine for a relational database. So here we are using MySQL engine for this particular instance. Available here, and you can see here master username is admin. So there would be one master username for each and every engine or every instance in RDS. For this particular instance, we have a username as admin. This is really important because once you gather the credentials, you need at least username as well as credentials to access this instance, and this is the master username. When you launch an instance or when you launch a RDS instance, by default it will create a username, and you can specify the name anything whichever you want. Now this is the endpoint. You can see here endpoint means how we can access the instance. So basically it's a host name of this particular instance, and this is the port where this instance is running. So when you're talking about the endpoint or a host name, you can see there is a DNS. This is the DNS identifications. But if this instance is not publicly accessible, that means you can only access within the VPC. One private IP will be mapped to this DNS. If it's a publicly accessible, then definitely one public IP address which is resolved to this DNS. So this is how, but this is really important to know about what is the host name or what is the endpoint, what is the master username, and then you need a password or any other authentication mechanism. So we got the information about this one. Now we are coming here. There is two important things. One is DB security group as well as VPC security group. So what is the difference and what is that? So basically VPC security groups is applicable when you have an instance, you launch an instance within a VPC, and you can have this virtual firewall. It's just like we have a security group in our EC2 is EC2. So basically it's EC2 where all these things will be managed by AWS, and it will allow you to only access the database. So basically it will filter your network, or in terms of is basically a firewall that will you can define incoming and as well as outgoing connections. So it's basically same like security group we have in EC2 instance. But what is this DB security group? So suppose if you have an instance which is not a part of any VPC. If not a part of VPC, we cannot attach VPC security group. So that means we can only attach DB security group, which is similar to VPC security groups, but it's not a part of VPC. That's why we call it DB security group. Which does the same thing like did by the VPC security group, which you can define the rules, the incoming as well as outgoing traffics. Then what is important information about a instance? So you can see here I'm going down. This is the availability zone. Where is this instance is running? This is really important because most of the organizations, if they have their critical data in RDS, generally they do have, so this instance can only be accessible within the VPC. So you need to understand about where this instance is running, what are their subnet. So in RDS there is one thing that's called subnet group. So we have VPS, we have a subnet, but in RDS we have a subnet groups. It's basically groups of subnets. So you can see these are the subnets which is there in this subnet group. So RDS can launch any of the subnet which is defined here. But there is one condition that when we are going to launch a RDS, two subnet will be there in two different availability zones. So suppose this subnet is a part of US East 2B, but there is one more subnet which is part of US East 2C. So it is for if one availability zone is down, you can even access your RDS instance because it's part of another availability zone. Currently it is running there in US East 2, but if this availability zone is somewhere, if it's down, you can access, still you can access this instance because we allocated these two subnets there. So that's why subnets group is really helpful for these kind of operations. So you should also understand during your red team operation because you should understand where is the subnet is, and you should also understand about what VPC ID where is this subnet is belongs to. Why? Because somehow the cases is just like you got an initial access on one of the VPC and you found that you somehow there is RDS instance which is your end goal, because the critical data is stored there in RDS. You have to exfiltrate the data, which is your end goal for a red teamers. You have to laterally move, or you have to perform pivoting to get into those subnet where, or those VPC where RDS is running. So that's why VPC is really important. So during your enumeration phase, you should note what is the VPC, what is the subnet where RDS is running. So you can laterally move, or you can perform pivoting to get the access of this particular RDS instance. And so this is all about like what we can get the information and how these information can help us to perform a further red team operations or any phases of red team operations. There is one more thing that we already discussed. This is a MySQL database, the engine which we are using, and this is a version of engine because you found sometime that it's vulnerable to any known vulnerability. So it's really important for you. And what next? Yes. There is one more important thing you can find out here. If this instance is publicly accessible, it's true. That means you can access the instance and from the internet, or we can say the DNS which is specified here, or the endpoint which is specified, have one public IP attached to this instance. But still you can define the rules there in security groups that there is some specific set of IPs or a specific range of IP can access this instance. But it's really important, if it's a publicly accessible, then it's a dangerous for organizations, and it's so somehow if it's really important to understand or to enumerate information about if it's accessible or it's publicly not accessible. You can see here this is the publicly accessible instance. Then one more important information about this instance or any instance, what you are going to enumerate is how we can authenticate to instance. So basically by default, what happens when we launch instance, there would be password based authentication is enabled by default. So that means even a master user or any other user which you create on the database can authenticate using username as well as password. So this is the traditional we are using and which by default. So whatever instance we have, if we have a username as well as password, we can authenticate to this particular instance. But what about, is there any other methods? Yes, as we already discussed, there is a 3 method which we can use to authenticate to a particular database. The first one is password based, of course. Second one is password based along with IAM. So if there is a user or role which have rights to access this database, you can definitely access it. And third one is password plus Kerberos authentication. But there is one criteria. Database by default only allow to password based authentications. If you enable any other authentication method, you have to enable explicitly when you launch instance, or after you're launching instance you can change it. So you can see here in this instance IAM database authentication enabled is false. That means it will only allow password based authentications. For in certain just like in MySQL, certain version of database authentication in RDS doesn't allow you to authenticate using Kerberos. That's why Kerberos is not there, but IAM is also disabled here in this particular instance. So that means if you are going to access this instance, you need credentials. In credential, you need a username as well as password for a role, for either a master account or any other user which is there in particular database. So by default, there is user account which is a master, or which is admin. You can say master account which is admin, but there may be a lot more user account you can create on in database level. Okay, so this is all about the first instance we have, and these are the information basically we need. What about next instance? So same like we have instance identifier, instance engine is also the same. This is the endpoint, same like we have in the first one. But what is important thing in for this instance is this one. Let's go down. Yes. So you can see here publicly accessible false. The first instance we saw is we can access from from internet. That means there is public IP attached to this particular instance. But in this case, there is a private IP associated with this particular DNS that is there in the top. So this is the endpoint where is private IP associated with this DNS, and it will be resolved by AWS DNS services, and it can only be accessible by default from the VPC, but you can even restrict the accessibility using setting the rules of security groups. And this is the one, and second one is this one, IAM authentications. You can see here this one, IAM database authentication enabled. That means if you want to access this instance, you can access by 2 methods. One is if you have a username and password, and second one is if you have a role attached to you, or attached to a user, or attached to any specific instance or EC2 instance, you can access this database using IAM database authentication. That means you can generate a token and then token. So this token will be used to authenticate without any password. So this is how you can authenticate to a particular database, and this is really important doing your red team operations. That's why enumeration is important, because we know we have a certain idea where we can access, how we can access, what are the things we need to access it, and this is all the information you get from this enumeration phase. So this is about the instance, how we can enumerate and what are the information is really important to particular, this particular database or instance. What next? So we can get the information about a subnet group. So you can see when we're going for enumerating the information about this instance, we can also have the subnet groups, but you can also get the information about all the subnets groups available in RDS services. Why it's important? Because there may be a case that you should understand about what are the critical VPC are there. Basically, because RDS is the only store in the critical or only running on the critical VPC. So subnet give you idea about how many critical VPC are there where RDS is running, and what is you can get the more information, or you can get the more juicy information from the there. So you can directly copy this command. It will be basically describe the information about subnet group in RDS. So it will give you all the subnets groups there in RDS services. Same like we have an instance, but in instance we have a security group, subnet group in instance level, but here you can get all the subnet groups. So this is the first subnet group we have. This is the second subnet group we have. If there is any other instance, there would be a subnet group, and you can also create your own subnet group. You can define how many subnets should be there in the subnet group. So that's all you can get the informations. Okay, so what next? There is this DB security group. So as we already discussed, there is a two type of security groups. Basically, there is a three type of security group. For our purpose, we can only understand there is a two type of security groups. One is VPC security group. It's similar to, it's not similar, but it's exactly the same. We are using in our instance for a security group, like EC2 instance, we have our security group. Here we have a VPC security group for the database level. If your instance or you're not a part of VPC, then you have a DB security group. So let's enumerate the DB security group. If there an instance which is not a part of database or not a part of RDS, you can still have this virtual firewall there. You can define who can access it on from where, or from what are the set of IP they can access this particular instance. So you can see here there is no security groups defined here. There is no instance where we can define the security group. That means all the instances are a part of VPC. So you can only attach the VPC security group. So when you have a VPC security group, you can get the information while going to the describe security group, which is a part of VPC. So you can get these information by our VPC module. So we already discussed how we can get the information about security groups using VPC services. So because it's a part of VPC, so we'll get the information in our VPC. What next? So this is a really important. We have a database proxy. It basically sits between your client may be your application, your Lambda functions or EC2 instance, as well as your RDS. So basically it will handle the connections. It will do all the operation, all the authentication or all scaling operation using the database proxy. So why it's really important? Because sometime you won't get any role, or sometime you won't get any password, but to authenticate to RDS directly, but you can access the database proxy, and that database proxy by default have a rights to access this particular instance. So this is how it will help you to authenticate to the database without needed any credentials. So let's see, let's copy this command. Is there any proxy? Is there or not? Open a new tab, paste it here. So currently there is no proxy is there, but proxy is basically related directly to a database, RDS database or instance. So suppose if you found that you can access the proxy, or if you as a user, or if you as a EC2 instance or Lambda function have a right to access this database proxy, and that proxy by default have a right to access the database, you can directly access the database through the proxy and without any credential. All the things take care by the proxy itself. So this is really important to keep in mind that for your red team operations. So this is all about how we can enumerate. There's a lot more things we can enumerate, but these are the common, or these are the important thing for our each and every phase. Because if you got these information, our main goal is to exfiltrate the data. So how we can exfiltrate? So RDS is basically one of the critical functions, or we can say critical service there in AWS, where they store the critical data or sensitive data for an organization. So if we have enough enumerations, then we can perform our red team operations to achieve our goal to exfiltrate the data from these RDS. So this is how you can enumerate. In our coming section, we will discuss about how we can actually authenticate to RDS and can exfiltrate the data from them. So this is all about this video. Thank you so much for watching this video.